We are filming for the Jazz Archive at Hamilton College. And today we have with us keyboard artist John Bunch. Pleased to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
I wanted to ask, when did you first start playing the piano and what led you to that?
Well, I had a different sort of beginning from a lot of people in this business. I'm from a small town in Indiana, a little very small town, and all of a sudden, along about when I was about 11 years old, a guy moved into town. He was a barber, and he taught the piano. He taught kids how to play the piano in 10 easy lessons. Learn how to play the piano in 10 easy lessons, and the kids loved this guy. He was George Johnson was his name, and he was just great with children. And I turned out to be one of his prize students. I learned very quickly, and by the time I was 13 years old, I was playing with adults around Indiana. And I thought I was a big shot.
What town was it?
Tipton, Indiana.
Okay.
It's still a small town.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you attended the great Indiana University.
I did later on after the war, after World War II, yeah.
Tell us about that. Tell us about the program that was going on at that time.
Well, they had a great music school. They still have, but at that time they frowned on jazz. Jazz was sort of a dirty word in those days. In 1946 or 5, whenever it was, and not only that, but I wasn't a very good legitimate musician. I couldn't read music very well, and didn't have any classical training. So I wasn't accepted in music school, so I was very disappointed. But I went there anyhow because there was a very good jazz band there that we made, we played a lot of dances. Med Flory's band, he's quite well known right here in Los Angeles. And anyhow, so I wanted to play with his band, so I signed up to be a student in speech. I was going to be a radio announcer.
Ah.
Figured that's as close as I can get to music. And meanwhile, I took piano lessons while I was there on the side,
Neat.
to learn to play classical music and read music better and everything.
Did you feel that helped your overall technique and you were able to blend the two concepts?
Yeah, to a certain degree. Yeah, to a certain degree. Although, it's debatable about that, about whether classical music helps your jazz or not. I don't know. That's, Benny Goodman played awful good before he ever studied a lot of classical music. So I'm not so sure that it really helps that much.
You talked about the World War II. There's word that you were a prisoner of war.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I always was fascinated by airplanes when I was a little kid growing up, and my father had been in World War I, and he was in the infantry, and he suffered terrible. I mean, he never was wounded, but he had terrible experiences in the World War I in the mud. He slept in the mud, and I thought, oh, I don't want to do that. If I have to go in those days, you had to, young men had to go in the service. You had no choice. So I thought, well, I love airplanes, so I'll volunteer to be in the Air Force. So I was able to work my way up to become a flying officer, in the Air Force, and flew missions over Germany, as it turned out. And on the 17th mission, I got shot down over Germany, deep into Germany, over Leipzig, near Leipzig, and was taken prisoner. Yeah.
How did you get out of it?
Well, it was a scary, very frightening situation. The whole thing, all the missions were too. It was terrible. I was lucky to live through it. My pilot and my navigator were killed that day. The day I got shot down. The plane blew up, and terrible thing. And then I went to the prison camp with other people who had the same experiences or worse even some. So we were all in it together. We were young. I was 21 or 22, and somehow we, and we didn't get much to eat, and we had a lot of misery in that prison camp, but we somehow pulled through. And I was one of the lucky ones. Some people died there, and some people were killed trying to escape, and so it was a pretty bad situation. But anyhow, through the grace of God, I made it.
Do you feel that has put a depth in your playing, an emotion?
Well,
because there's word that your ballad playing is just beautiful.
Well, that's a nice compliment. I don't know. I think that that coupled with the fact that the depression, I'm a child of, when I started taking the piano lessons, the depression hit this country. Depression was a wonderful word for it. It was a very depressed time that you can't put it in words. Everybody was broke. And my parents broke up. I was left with my mother. My mother had to raise me. She had to take a job in a restaurant. So we were very poor. So I think that had a little to do with the if I have any feeling for music, it's probably helped a little to, sometimes I think I can use the music to remember those days.
Uh-huh.
So I'm not saying that it's a necessity, but it probably helped a little.
Is there a specific art to playing a ballad? What goes into playing a great ballad on the keyboard?
I don't know. I think you have. Well, I think you have to listen to records a lot. I was influenced by people like Johnny Hodges. I immediately think when you mention that, I think of Johnny Hodges with Duke Ellington's band, and people like that. Yank Lawson, a trumpet player who just passed away a year ago. Certain musicians that I really think really had almost make you cry when they play a ballad. The violinist Ray Nance with Duke Ellington. I was crazy about Duke Ellington, you can tell. And certain people I think that inspiration helped me a lot. And you have to see them in person too. Those that have seen them, which I have seen them a lot. So
seeing a great artist in person is different from just getting the record, isn't it?
Yeah, particularly Johnny Hodges. He was a miracle man, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Tell us about some of your influences, some of your keyboard influences.
Well, at the beginning, since it happened when I was 11, 12 years old, taking those piano lessons, the music that appealed to me most then was the pianists were Fats Waller and Teddy Wilson. Really different kinds of pianists, but I loved them both. They were both great. And particularly Teddy, I even tried to imitate him, I'd get his records and try to play like him, And many years passed, and I was able to meet him, and we even traveled together on 2 different trips. One over in Russia for 6 weeks, and then one later with Buddy Rich. I was with Buddy, and he had his own trio, and I got to know him, which was a big thrill for me, So anyhow, those were my first influences. Then later, after World War II, I got in with the beboppers.
Uh-huh.
And
who's your favorite bebop artist on keyboard?
Bud Powell, by far. Yeah, he was outstanding. To me, there was nobody like Bud Powell. He's so exciting. Yeah.
You said that for a time you tried to play like Teddy Wilson. And another great artist, Clark Terry, talked about first imitation, then integration, then innovation.
Well, that's probably right. I never thought of it that way. That's right. That's right. Well, I don't think a young person should push themselves to become unique. You just let it happen, maybe it'll never happen, I don't know. But, I'm thinking of Scott Hamilton. When Scott Hamilton first started, I started playing with him when he was real young, came to New York. He was influenced by very strongly by Ben Webster and I guess Lester Young. And but now, you know, the years have passed and he's just sort of gradually evolved into his own style, you know, just happened, you know.
Takes time.
People tell me they can identify me now when they hear a record. Well, I feel that's a compliment. That's kind of nice.
I want to ask you about being the accompanist and the music director for one of the greatest and most recognizable jazz voices there's ever been, Tony Bennett.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, he was, you know, I had I didn't have that kind of background at all. He made, I guess he'd heard me play solo when I used to be a relief piano player at the Hickory House in New York. And I had very little experience playing with singers and none as a conductor. And anyhow, then later, years passed, and I was with Buddy Rich's band, that very exciting band he had. And Tony came. This happened right here in L.A. There was a club here that didn't last very long, and we were playing, and Tony Bennett was in the audience, and he came up to sing, and I guess he must have liked what I played, because he just faked a tune. We had no arrangement or anything. He just said, do you know whatever it was? It's a Good Life, or some tune like that. And I guess he liked what he heard, because like a few weeks later, I got a phone call. Said, would you like to play with Tony Bennett? I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this? But anyhow, I went over to his apartment, and I played a few tunes behind him. He says, you got the job if you want it. Wow. And I said, well, Tony, you know, first of all, I'm not a great, I still wasn't a great sight reader. And I never conducted in my life. I practically tried to talk myself out of the job. That's why he was so nice. He said, well, you can learn on the job. So that's what the first, well, quickly I took some conducting lessons from a guy that I know had played under conductors for years. And he gave me all of his music and all of his recent records, and I took them all home and studied them and looked at the music and listened to the records. And so in a few weeks I was able to learn how to do it. You know, I guess I was a natural. That's what people say. It was very satisfying to prove that I held the job for 6 years, and very satisfying. But it's just not me. You know, I mean, it gave me great satisfaction to be able to do that job, but there was time for me to leave after 6 years and get back to doing what I like to do, which is just play music, play tunes.
What's your favorite setting, your overall favorite setting as a keyboard artist?
My favorite setting would be just playing a piano in about a quartet with a good horn player, maybe one or maybe two, with Sonny Rollins or somebody like that. Well, not Sonny, the Sonny Rollins that I used to know. I hope he doesn't hear that. Are you going to interview him?
We'll edit it out.
No, we won't, but we won't.
Talk to us briefly about your time with the Buddy Rich Band. And about Buddy as a musician, as a leader, as an artist.
Well, Buddy Rich, I have worked and recorded long periods of time with three people: Tony Bennett, Buddy Rich, and who else? And let's see, Tony Bennett, Buddy Rich. Can't think of who the third one was. Must be in good shape.
Goodman?
Goodman. How could I forget Benny Goodman? And somebody said, you know, you worked with these three people that have this ungodly reputations for being difficult to work for. And somebody told me, says, you're either a priest, a psychiatrist, or you're just as nuts as they are. But anyhow, you know, they're all very difficult. They were all very difficult personalities to satisfy. but they're all great. They're all great musicians. I'm not talking about the musicianship. They're all brilliant, you know. And it was a big thrill. I mean, in each case, working with any of them. But I mean,
What were they like?
well, you know, Benny Goodman was. You just can't explain him. You never could understand what he wanted sometimes. And then he could turn around and be an absolute dream guy, just a life of the party. He could turn out to tell jokes, and if you told him a joke and he was in the right mood, he'd collapse on the floor practically laughing. And you know, he could be just a really wonderful guy. But then he could turn around at a rehearsal and just practically insult a person, you know, insult a musician. You know, he'd give you a look like, terrible look you in the eye and go, as if, as if he hated you, you know. I got sort of used to it after a few years, you know. And now Buddy Rich was, he was always very nice to me, and, you know, always, you know, let me take solos and feature me and all that stuff. But he was really tough on the young musicians. I thought unreasonably so. You know, he'd have tirades. He had great temper tantrums, almost like a little child, spoiled child. And it was sort of embarrassing to be there and witness that. You know. I mean, but then you turn around and play the drums, so great. I mean, it's so exciting. You could hardly play with him, you know. And when he'd feature me, he would play so soft and so as if it was my band. Always, when he'd feature that one tune, he'd feature me on. It was so delicate, and he'd turn right around. This guy that had this temper. You know, it's hard to figure out. And in Tony Bennett's case, I think it was, in that case, it was more familiarity. I just was so close to him all the time. You had a pianist that plays for a singer like that. It's so professional. I can't tell you what it is. It's got to be exactly. It can't be just sort of exact. It's got the tempos have to be on the button, and the bass player. If he can't be faking. It's got to be every note's got to be exactly what the music says. It's a different kind of music from jazz, you know. Maybe it's different now. He does have a trio. He works with a trio now. But see, when I was with him, it was big orchestras, great big orchestras, even symphonies sometimes. And anyhow, he wanted it just so. And the slow tempos were so slow. That takes a great concentration for a musician to play slow. It's not just concentration to play fast. Slow is also very difficult.
Sometimes it's
Really
harder
slow.
than playing fast, isn't it?
Yes, almost, because you can't dare take a drink, and you know, before the show. At least I had to quit all that. No more, not even a martini before dinner or anything like that. Just nothing. Because it took too much concentration. And then after, you know, a few years of that, I finally got to where I decided it was time to leave. So anyhow, that's the sort of story that I have about those three.
But that's marvelous insights.
Yeah.
You toured Europe, I think, in 1974.
Well, I've been to Europe a lot of times. You know, almost every year I go there with somebody, seems like. Yeah.
How is it different than playing in the United States?
You mean playing in Europe compared to this country? Well, you know, you got to realize that, you know, Europe, people don't hear jazz to the degree that they do in this country. You know, it's not, they don't have the exposure that we do in America. I mean, there's a lot of jazz played over there, but not like here. So naturally, they appreciate it more. You know. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons they do. Everybody says, a lot of musicians over the years figured, oh, Europe, yeah, and some of them go over there and live over there. But sometimes when they live over there, then it's a little different story. Then they're not, they're local. And they're not heroes quite to the extent as they were before.
It's called maintaining a mystique.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of some of the exciting things that you've done, what did it feel like when you conducted the Los Angeles Philharmonic?
Oh, you know about that? Well, that was just a wonderful experience. The not having, like I told you, I started out playing jazz from this, and I've always had this sort of feeling of inferiority. I still do. It's hard to. It's in my system. I can't. I feel like I don't deserve whatever success I've had. Well, I mean, to be up in front of an orchestra like that, is tough. But I found out that I was always worried that maybe I might be challenged. My conducting might be challenged by great musicians like the caliber of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. I mean, what am I doing stand up in front of them, And it turns out that those musicians are so great. They're just great, or they wouldn't even be there in the first place, And that music is so easy for them. They can look around. They can look around, and play it beautifully, perfect. And so they made me look like a great conductor. So it really turned out to be, it wasn't anything to be that afraid of, And I also was given confidence by getting acquainted with some of the concertmaster, not the one here, but in London. I remember in London, I got acquainted with the concertmaster of the London Philharmonic. He says, "Oh, you're." See, I know musicians well enough to know that if you don't really need to conduct, leave it alone. Don't conduct. They like that. Musicians like that, and they like that about me. That I only conducted when it was necessary. Once it goes into a steady tempo, 1, 2, 3, 4, I just sit down the piano, play the piano. The only conducting that was necessary was when the tempo sort of changed, at the ending, usually at the ending or at the beginning. And they liked that. They didn't want to see me waving my arms unnecessarily. Anyhow, I felt real good about that, to get some kind of compliments from great musicians like that.
But there's a rapport that takes place between a conductor and an orchestra. And if they strike that rapport, great music happens.
Beg your pardon?
There's a rapport that takes place between a conductor and an orchestra.
Yeah, I think my work, I've enjoyed playing background and being in bands. I've played in big bands more than most jazz piano players. I work, with Woody Herman, Maynard Ferguson, and Benny Goodman's big bands. And I think being one of the boys in the band helped me understand musicians better, because I know how I felt as a sideman. So I mean, these people in the orchestra, they're sort of sidemen. I hate to use that expression, but and I know you got to be. Psychologically, I knew how to. I learned how to conduct a rehearsal. Don't come on like a big. Just say what's necessary to get the music accomplished at the rehearsal. Also, I would sometimes Tony Bennett, he got confidence in me as the years went by, to where he wouldn't even show up at the rehearsal, and I'd play his part on the piano, the vocal part on the piano, so that the orchestra would know what the melody was, and I'd swing it a little, I'd put a few extra little jazz notes in there, and I'd let them. That's just show off, to let them know I was one of them. I was one of the boys in the band. That I wasn't just some corny guy, And they liked, I could tell they liked it, particularly with Duke Ellington's band and Basie and Woody Herman band. I had to conduct all those bands, behind Tony Bennett. So.
You conducted Basie?
Yeah. Yeah, I even took his place at his birthday party one time. That was another thrill for me.
Oh, tell us about that.
Yes. Yeah, at the Waldorf Astoria, at the Grand Ballroom, they had a big birthday party. I think it was his, I think it was 65th or 70th. I'm not sure. 65th, I guess. And I had been, we had just made a little tour. I mean, when I was still playing with Tony Bennett, was my regular job. But you know, we just finished the tour of England with Count Basie's band backing up Tony Bennett and also doing their own music. And you know, the guys kind of like me. I used to travel on the bus. I preferred traveling on the bus with them to riding in a limo with Tony. Not that I was trying to be down home. I just, to tell you the truth, for personal, I didn't want to stay away from Tony Bennett. I got so much of Tony Bennett. And hearing him complain to the agent about the business and this and that, and I liked going with the guys on the band. So anyhow, as a result of being band having confidence in me, they hired me to play at his birthday party with the band, with Basie's band up on the stage. So that was a great kick for me, and like, you know, grew up, you know, listening to Basie. They even used to call me Count Bunch when I was about 14, 15 years old, because I could imitate him too, you know. So, I mean, you know, all these years passed, and then here I am sitting playing the old Basie's music. It's a big thrill.
In front of him.
Yeah, in front of Basie. Basie's there, and Joe Jones and many of his ex-musicians. Buck Clayton was in the audience, and oh, it was an unbelievable experience. I just ran into a couple of the guys that remembered that. A couple of Basie guys that are still with them. Mel, can't remember Mel, the trombone player's name. Been with them all these 20-some years. We were talking about that experience.
Are there any other musicians that you've played with that you shared a particularly fun or fulfilling experience with?
Well, there's a new guy that I work with that I find is just a delightful guy to play with, and he's only 27 years old, and he's also my tennis. He's the guy that ruined my wrist. We played tennis together. He lives right across the river. I live right in Manhattan, and he lives just over crossing the river, and I get in my car and drive over and play tennis with him whenever I can. And his name is Harry Allen. You ever heard of him by any chance?
No,
Well, he started out. Now, I met him when he was 16. Scott Hamilton used to let him sit in because he liked his playing, and he loved Scott Hamilton. But now he's developed into he's going to really be. You're going to hear a lot about this guy Harry Allen. Yeah, and he doesn't play. He's a swing tenor man. Plus, he's a delightful guy. Really a joy to play with. Just a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, jokes all the time. So that's nice.
Humor is a big part of this music, isn't it?
Yeah. That's what my wife tells me. She says she says the funniest that I am is when I'm around musicians, and I guess that's when they get together somehow it just comes out, the humor somehow. I don't understand why, what it is. But if you're around it, you seem to know a lot about that. It just seemed, I observe it myself. It's just jokes and so forth, a lot of jokes.
The way that you've learned, you've played with a lot of great musicians. Is jazz education different now, and is it better, or is it missing something?
Well, see, you're asking the wrong guy. I don't know anything about jazz education. I don't even understand how there could be such a term, jazz education. But I know it's going on. In fact, the very university, Indiana University, where I went to school, that I said they frowned on jazz. Well, now it's known as one of the best schools, I guess, in the country to teach jazz. And so, I mean, I just never no one's ever asked me to lecture or say anything in front of young students, so I just wouldn't know much about that. I guess there's ways of teaching it, but I don't know how it's done, really. Ignorant about that. One pianist, by the way, when he was about 18 years old, kept hanging around me, trying to get me to teach, give him lessons. And I told him I don't know how to, I wouldn't know how to teach. And you have to want to do that. You have to have a desire for that. And he finally talked me into coming. I said, all right, come up to my apartment and I want to hear you play. This guy came up there and played so much more piano than I do. It was embarrassing. His name is Michael Adon. Have you heard of him? Boy, he's really great. He's becoming a hell of a piano player. He's playing with people like Milt Jackson quite a lot. He's playing with Sonny Rollins lately too. So I mean, I told him, I said, you're already playing with guys that I wanted to play with all my life and never got a chance to, really. So it was. I just felt like there was nothing I could show him, Maybe I'm putting myself down when I say that. Maybe there is something. I don't know what it would be though. I think that a young person, if they have a lot of talent, records are very important. Scott Hamilton's got a record collection you wouldn't believe. He knows much more about saxophone players than I do. He's put together some tapes for me. They're wonderful stuff that I never even knew existed. So I'm saying that he learned a lot from listening to records. He lived in up there in a small town outside of Providence, Rhode Island, and like I live in this very small farm town, but the records, I started hearing these records. And if you got the talent, I think you steal, you steal from these guys. Steal whatever you can. It's fun when you're a kid, it's really fun to try to play like them,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how you learn. Yeah.
If you could write your own ticket for the next 3 or 4 years, play with anybody, go anywhere, do anything, your dream requisition, what would be on it?
Well, I would like I told Mike Ladon, I'd like to play with Milt Jackson. There's so few guys around that, like I said, I liked Sonny Rollins the way he used to play back 30 years ago, and I still like him. He's a wonderful guy. It's just that he's so far out. But I mean, anyhow, I would like to play with. Like I say, I'm old enough that I started with the old, even Dixieland. I played with a lot of Dixieland bands too. And I don't put any of that down, but I just happen to. My favorite is sort of bebop kind of music, and I'd love to be able to play with somebody like Milt Jackson, because he's one of the few outstanding guys I can think of that can lead a quartet. So that would be my ultimate, I guess. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for conversing with us. Mary, do you have another question you might ask?
I'm just off on the sidelines. John, you were talking about some of the people who had great stories that we should talk to, and you mentioned Milt Hinton and Doc Cheatham. I take it that you know some of those stories. Do you? Would you share any of this?
I can't think of any stories in relation to those two. I'm not a very good. I don't have a great memory. As far as me, I was just telling some people today. I also worked with Gene Krupa quite a lot, and a quartet. With Charlie Ventura. And he was one of the great guys, one of the nicest guys, personally, A complete opposite from these three people that I worked long periods of time from. And I should put a word in, speaking of nice guys that had fame and everything, Woody Herman was another one that I worked for, and they were both great. And now Gene was, here's an example of how nice he was. When I got that job, we couldn't find any, they had, and there's nothing written down for that quartet. It had to be memorized. So we had to have a rehearsal for my benefit, and we couldn't find it. Things were very busy in New York then, and you couldn't find a rehearsal hall just at the drop of a hat like that. And I said, well, if you don't mind, come up to my place. I have a Steinway Grand, and I have a set of drums. I had drums. I had a bass even, because I used to like to have jam sessions at my apartment. And he asked me about the drums. I said they're Slingerland drums, which that was his company, and he said, okay, I'll bring the cymbals and we'll rehearse it at your place. So we came up there, and when he was up there, he said, what kind of cymbals do you have? And I showed him mine, and he didn't say anything. And a year or two passed. I started working with him, you know, and a year or two passed. And one time we were in Boston, we met Zildjian, who was the great cymbal maker. Just out of a clear blue sky, he says, hey, why don't you give John Bunch some cymbals? Send John Bunch some cymbals. He's got a nice set of drums, but he doesn't have very good cymbals. He remembered that. So I didn't think anything about it. For all, nothing will ever happen. And about two or 3 weeks later, and I got a big special package, very heavy, full of these cymbals. The best cymbals, hand-picked by Zildjian himself.
Wow. Thanks
to Gene. I mean, that was just the kind of a guy he was, you know. So, you know, when I unwrapped them, they were sort of dirty looking, and I'm thinking, not knowing anything about drums, I thought, oh, you didn't give me nice new cymbals. And I showed them to, I think it was Jake Hanna or somebody, and he said, my, those are wonderful cymbals. It's a hand-picked, they're perfect. He said, that's worth, I don't know, a lot of money. I said, you can't find cymbals like that. So anyhow, thanks to Gene, I got all those wonderful things. And there's memory, I mean, that he could remember that, you know. Take time to remember something like.
Well, thank you so very much.
Okay.
And we've enjoyed talking with you. This has been an interview with John Bunch for the Hamilton Jazz Archive.